Well, they were to be protected from deportation, but now some 5 million undocumented immigrants are caught in a battle between America's president, Congress, and the court. When the U.S. Congress failed to pass immigration reform, President Barack Obama took executive action in November. But this week, a Texas judge ruled against the administration. Now, with 26 states opposing the executive action, the judge says undocumented immigrants cannot come out of the shadows until legal issues are indeed resolved. But will the administration seek an emergency order to allow their plan to go forward? That's the question. Compounding the matter is a looming deadline. Well, the Department of Homeland Security runs out of money this coming Friday. Republicans in Congress have linked funding to a rollback of the president's immigration policy. Well, despite the threat, the president says he'll veto any legislation that repeals his immigration plan. Well, we're joined by immigration attorney Neal Richardson Datta and Arise News senior Washington correspondent Colin Powell. Welcome to both of you. And Colin, I want to start with you first. Was the administration caught by surprise by the judge's ruling?
Yes, Julian, and I'm Colin Campbell. I wish I was Colin Powell.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right.
It's early, Colin.
It's early. I know that. Say that again, Julian.
It's early.
No. What was your question?
Okay. We're going to start this over again. Do you think the administration was caught by surprise by this ruling?
Yeah, I think it was caught by some surprise, but not totally, because there was expected to be a block. Of course, this was a controversial measure since the president signed his executive action. There was a lot of controversy over this. There was a lot of flack that the White House received over this. So it isn't totally something that caught the White House by surprise, but they did think that he was in this legal authority to do so, and they thought this was going to go through. So it's on a scale. You can't say that they were totally surprised by it, but they were expecting to not receive so much of an obstacle in order to get this through now, which they're facing.
Absolutely. Of course, at least I didn't call you Colin.
Exactly.
I want to follow up with that. Now, what's the administration's game plan right now?
Well, they have two arrows in the quiver right now. They could either file a stay, an emergency stay, which would block the judge's ruling and still allow President Obama's executive actions to go through, or they can file an appeal. And the reason why the latter would be a little bit more judicially not as expedient, but a lot more proper, would be because there is a problem with the legislative process, and that it could take months before this is finally figured out. Some believe that it would not even take place before the president leaves office. So a lot of immigration advocates would rather see an emergency stay happen. That way, these immigrants, these undocumented immigrants, would not be held in limbo for so long.
Neal, I want to bring you into this discussion as well here. What makes this solution or plan different from any others that have been proposed or presented in the past, in your opinion?
Well, I think the main thing is that it has a tremendous reach. So the estimates are that upwards of 6 million people could be impacted. Now, in the past, there was an amnesty program that was signed by Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, but less than about 2 million people benefited from that. Of course, what's also different is that this is coming simply as a result of the president having chosen to execute this or order this on his own authority. So there's a legislative aspect in terms of procedure that's different. And also there's the breadth of potential impact in the sense that so many immigrants could potentially benefit.
I mean, yeah, we're talking about maybe 5 or 6 million, perhaps even more. But what about prosecutorial discretion in this matter here? I'm sure that plays into this whole factor, doesn't it?
Well, prosecutorial discretion is at the essence of the conflict in the sense that so many believe that he's overstepping his bounds and in actuality creating legislation which is improper. My own view is that, in fact, the Immigration and Nationality Act, as it currently exists, gives the president a tremendous amount of discretionary authority, and that the current statute contains within it sufficient legislative approval for the president's action, and that what he's doing is well within the currently established legislative structure in exercising prosecutorial discretion.
Okay, you say what he's doing now is well within, I would say, and I'm going to just make this a little broader, with a broad stroke here, his rights. And Colin, I want to ask you about this as well. I would think that this is more of a political strategy by the Republicans to kind of to thwart this action, something that they don't want. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a strategy here because they want to paint the president as this this dictator, this king that just wants to circumvent the laws of the United States and do his own thing. Of course, they do know that it could come to some political peril as well, but they're kind of betting right now that it will make the president look a lot worse to have lack of funding for the DHS than it would be to allow him to go through with this immigration policy and to answer to their constituents back at home.
Well, Neal, this brings up a point here. Making the president look bad, making the president look bad, making the president look bad. I can repeat that a million times over again. What about the people that are involved here? Does anybody in Washington care about immigration reform? Do they care about the immigrants? Or are they more concerned about making the president look bad?
Well, if you look at it from the Republican standpoint or the overall political standpoint in the United States, it's somewhat historically clear that from the get-go, the Republicans have taken the position that they wanted Obama to fail as a president. And if you want to talk about overstepping or perhaps working outside of the bounds of our democracy, one could say that the Republicans have abdicated their role in our society in terms of legislating. And in essence, they have gone about doing everything they can to stop any type of legislation. So, the hope is that at some point, of course, that the Republicans will join with Democrats and the advocates that are in Washington to try to create some type of legislative reform. And in fact, the numbers were there. Mm-hmm. The fact is that had the immigration reform proposal that had passed the United States Senate made it to the floor of the House, it would have passed.
Right.
And the fact that it didn't, the responsibility for that is entirely in John Boehner's hands.
Colin, I want to end with you on this. I can't pass, certainly Arise Review or this network is not a mouthpiece for the Obama administration or anybody for that matter. But, a lot of things here just to be quite preposterous. I want to talk about the Department of Homeland Security here. Their funding is about to expire. Do you think this will happen? Will Republicans allow DHS funding to expire?
Well, it depends on which chamber you're talking about. Now, if you look at House Republicans, John Boehner said that he was perfectly willing to allow DHS funding to expire, which would put further pressure on the White House and Democrats to try to get this bill pushed through, this House Appropriations bill pushed through that Senate Democrats and are not accepting. But you might see a little bit of a cooperation here in the Senate, where some of Senate Republicans are saying, listen, if we accept one part of President Obama's immigration initiative here, and that would be allowing DACA to happen, the Deferred Action for Children to happen, but repeal the most recent executive action, which would allow more parents to stay here, then maybe we could put something together that will still allow for DHS funding. And that's what you're going to hear on the Hill this week, is trying to mash together a hybrid legislation of what the House put together and what the White House sort of wants.
All right, we'll have to end it right there. Our four-star General and Chief of Staff, Colin Campbell in Washington, D.C., and of course, Neal Richardson Datta. Thank you so much for
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right. Well, the White House is